Good morning everyone and welcome to the Interreg Europe Match-Up Mobility Cafe. My name is Rose Power and I am the EU Project Officer with the Southern Regional Assembly with responsibility for the Match-Up project. The Southern Regional Assembly is delighted to host this event in conjunction with An Taisce Green Schools and Waterford Institute of Technology. The Youth Voice, joining the conversation on sustainable transport in Waterford, offers a platform for the young people of Waterford to share their voice on sustainable transport. In particular, I want to welcome all the boys and girls who have joined us this morning or who have made a contribution to this event by sending through an audio clip, a video or questions for our panellists, which we will address later in the webinar. I'd like to also introduce to you my co-moderator for today, Karen Coughlin, who is also an EU Project Officer with the Southern Regional Assembly. And I'm now going to hand over to Karen, who will take you through the housekeeping and some rules for today. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks very much, Rose. And just, I suppose, to mirror what Rose said, to welcome everybody to today's webinar. So as Rose said, I'm just going to take you through some quick housekeeping before we get started. If you wish to ask us a question or even just to make a comment, you can type these into the question box on your control panel, which you'll see here circled in red on the right hand side. Now I'm going to test everybody to see if you've been listening to me and can you follow the instructions. So can everybody type in what location they're logging in from today, or even better, if you want to let us know what school you're attending from. So I'll give you a couple of moments to type that in. So again, it's just into your question section on the right hand side in your control panel. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to do that. And maybe once we start getting some answers, we'll ask Alice to come on and just let us know where are you logging in from today and what school you're attending.
Thank you, Karen. So we have some great counties represented here today, and we've lots of different schools. We have schools logging in from St. Stephen's National School, Ballygunner in Waterford, St. Martin's, the Mercy, Waterpark, Ferrybank, Newtown. They're coming in faster than I can read them. So we have attendees as well from UCC in Cork. We have Limerick, Dublin, Kildare. We have Cork's Educate Together School. We have a Cork City Councillor logging in. We also have the Green Schools. We have Maynooth. We have Mobility and Transport. And we have Dublin represented as well. Wow. So welcome everybody.
Welcome everybody, that covers it all. And I see from some of our panellists here we have somebody logging in from the Convention Centre in Dublin where the Dáil is sitting today, so that's great to hear. And from Kilkenny representing some of the schools there, so thanks for that, that's great to see. I have one final task for everybody out there. I'm going to be asking you, where is Fionn the Foot? So we're going to be checking to see if you're paying attention today. So how many Fionn the Foot will you find? A little tip for you, you could find them in the presentations or they could be hidden in some of the videos. So you're going to have to keep a very close eye this morning on everything going on. And we'll be asking you to submit how many you found at the end of the webinar to check and see where you're paying attention. So just to introduce you to our panel members, so at this point I'm going to ask all our panel members to turn on their cameras, but if they could just remain muted. And I'm going to introduce them all. And maybe as you hear your name, if you could just maybe raise your hand just to alert everybody who you are. So the first I'm going to introduce is Dominic Walsh. So Dominic is a Regional Planning Officer here in the Southern Regional Assembly, and he has responsibility for implementation of the Regional Spatial and Economic Strategy, or better known as the RESIS, and he has particular emphasis for the southeast area of the Southern Region. We have Jane Hackett, who is joining us as National Manager with An Taisce Green Schools and the Green Schools Travel Programme. We have Deputy Mark O'Casey, who's a TD and spokesperson for Social Protection, Green Party, and he's a representative for Waterford City and County Council, and also a founding member of the Waterford Cycling Campaign. Joining us from the Department of Education today, we have Leona DeCores, who's the Assistant Principal Officer with the Curriculum and Assessment Policy Unit. And we have Shirley Carney, who is Assistant Principal Officer with the School Transport Unit. We have Fergus Galvin, who's joining us today, and he's Director of Services in the Roads, Waterford and Environment with Waterford City and County Council, and he has responsibility for the Waterford Metropolitan Area Transport Plan. We have Rachel Cahill, who is Head of Executive Office with Transport Infrastructure Ireland, and Rachel is also author of Travelling in a Woman's Shoes, July 2020. And we have Robert Parkinson, who's with the Strategic Planning Section with the National Transport Authority, and Robert also has responsibility for the implementation of the Waterford Metropolitan Area Transport Plan. So just to say thank you to all our panellists today, and we look forward to joining you in the discussion later on. So just ask that everybody could turn off their cameras again. Thank you very much. And I'm going to hand you over to Rose now, who's going to get things kick-started and is going to give us an overview on the Match Up project.
So thank you very much. I think Karen, for that, and I think we have a very interesting panel of speakers, so we'll hopefully be able to put some interesting questions to them throughout the course of today. So I'd like to present some information to you on the Match Up project. And the Match Up project is an Interreg Europe project that's seeking to improve the connection and the interchange between low carbon modes of transport. So that's walking, cycling, rail, bus, green vehicles, and all other forms of public transport. We're working with 5 countries on this project. So the Southern Regional Assembly is representing Ireland, and we have partners from Portugal, Italy, Germany, and Romania. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to share with you just a quick video that gives you a further explanation of the Match Up project, and then I'll take you through after that what we are currently doing on the project here in Ireland. Thank you. So thank you for that. I hope this video just gives you a little bit of an understanding of what the Match Up project is about. And the purpose of these Interreg Europe projects is that, first of all, we learn from the partners that we're working with in Europe, so the other 4 countries that we're working with, and to ultimately help us to create a regional action plan that will improve the transport policies in the southern region, with the ultimate aim that we reduce CO2 emissions. An example of this would be one of the actions in our regional action plan is to create a tool for local authorities to help them or to implement a 10-minute town concept. So what is a 10-minute town concept? Well, it's a town where all essential services can be reached within a 10-minute walk or cycle, or will link to public transport that will allow you to do that. And when we say essential services, we're talking about schools and colleges, but we're also talking about health and retail and leisure, so that you can fulfill all your essential needs within that 10-minute walk or cycle or bus ride. So the learnings from the Match Up project allowed us to create an implementation tool which sets out a framework and a methodology to implement a 10-minute town concept. And this is one of the regional policy objectives of our regional spatial and economic strategy. And the hope is that this tool will assist local authorities to implement this 10-minute town concept for all key towns in Southern Ireland. So moving on now, I'd like to ask the audience a question. So I'd like to ask you how you currently travel to school or college. Do you walk? Do you cycle? Do you scoot to school maybe? Do you use the bus, train, or do you travel by car? And I suppose this is applicable also to the parents that are on our webinar today. So you might, if you wouldn't mind, just click on which of those is the most appropriate answer and let us know what way or what mode of transport you're currently using to travel to school. So we might just give you a moment to answer that. So if you just use your mouse to click on the relevant or the most appropriate mode of transport that you're using. Okay, so we might try and see what results we have in relation to that now. Okay, so looking at our results this morning, we can see that 35% of people walk to school, which is great. And we also have 23% that are cycling to school. We don't have anyone scooting to school, but look, maybe that's our more junior members of our society. And we have some people that are taking the bus, but you can see there's a huge proportion still travelling by car. So hopefully today is an opportunity to see what we can do to improve the infrastructure or improve what we're currently doing to try and encourage those people that are still travelling to school by car to maybe look at other more sustainable modes of transport. So we'll close the poll there. Okay. So moving on, as you'll all be aware, we obviously have a pandemic at the moment and we're in lockdown. So while we would have loved this event to have been a physical event as opposed to online, obviously there were some constraints in us doing that. In addition to that, obviously over the last number of weeks, our schools have been closed, so it has been very difficult to arrange for live presentations from our primary and secondary schools for the event today. So what we've done in advance of the event is we've sought video and audio recordings and questions from our students, and we've pulled together some of those in order to create a video. So the first video we're going to play for you is primary schools who wanted to share with you what they have been doing under the Green Schools Travel Programme in order to travel to school more sustainably, and also some recommendations on further support that they may require. So just for the boys and girls that are with us today, please keep an eye out because I think Fionn on the Foot might make an appearance during this video. So if you sit back and relax, and we'll just play that video for you there now.
In school we have walk on Wednesday, that is how. Listen to this song and sing how we can help our community. We like to park and stride, cause we like to exercise. meeting friends along the way. Hey, hey. No cars to save some fuel. If we live far, then carpool. Plenty of places we can go. Oh. Make your carbon footprint small. Don't be shy and you go tall. Be the best that you can be. For us all in society. Go, 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 go. Go, 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 go. Go, go, go. Sustainable travel is the way to go.
They find that in the car it's quiet and everybody listens to the music and I'm kind of bored and they're kind of bored. But on the way to school we talk to other kids, they're skipping around. Well, to me it's because I think they get the exercise and that's why I do it, and I do get the exercise. For them, they're more alert, they come to school and they're skipping and they're, I think, the benefits from the walk rather than just sit in the car and listen to the radio or whatever.
It's healthy. It wakes the kids up before they go into class in the morning. They're always early. They're not rushing. There's not that feeling of rush. You just give yourself an extra 10-15 minutes up early in the morning, and they basically they're quite happy doing it, and they just get used to it. And you end up actually, I pass more cars on the road.
Going out in the fresh air and riding our bikes. Wake up, be cool, walk to school.
It's better walking because instead of wasting all your petrol. You should walk because you get good exercise. It's saving CO2, and when you get to school, your brain will be ready for more work. I like parking in the garden because it's fun to walk and look at leaves and stuff. Like walking to school because it makes you healthy.
Big Birds Friday! Wow! Big
Hi, I'm Roisin and I'm in Rangashay in Gaelscoil Street. I've always wanted to be able to cycle to school, and it just didn't seem possible. I'd done it when my dad was in college. I'd sit in the back of the bike in like juniors, infants or something, and then but it just never seemed possible to go by myself. When we moved house just this time last year, it was really good because I kind of got the hope again that I could cycle again to school, and then I got really excited, but I didn't want to get my hopes up, and everybody else was really excited, and because you see, I heard the principal mention when I saw everybody else coming in. I was kind of jealous actually, because I wanted the chance to be able to cycle to school, because I always wanted to help the environment and I never felt that I was doing enough, and I wanted to be able to do more. When Sean O'Harrigan, my principal, he asked, why aren't you cycling? And I said, well, I can't because my mum and dad are working, and I never thought that I'd be able to. And then he mentioned a cycle bus, and then from then on I was talking to my siblings about it all the time. My 2 8-year-old brothers and my little sister Maeve, she's 11 now, and so it was really fun. Just in the morning it was way more fun because when we got up, I was really excited. I got up earlier, and then I had to go. It was my job to get the helmets. It made the morning a lot more fun, and then we cycled off. And then I thought it would be a problem with the bags, but really I forgot about them after a while, and I didn't even notice they were there. And I thought it kind of would be a problem because I did think that we were a bit far away. We're about 4 kilometers away, and I thought we'd be on the bikes for ages. And I wasn't really happy. I thought it wouldn't be kind of boring on the bike, but really it's just so much fun. Like, it's exhilarating, the wind, and we go fast enough. Well, we go slow enough for everybody. My brothers, they couldn't really keep up at the time, so we slowed down. We adjusted for everybody. And then we had a girl who lives down the road from me. Now she's in seniors infants now, and she's, I'd say, I don't know, she'd be maybe 6 or 7, and she cycled the whole way, and it just shows that everybody can do it. And her mom and dad, they volunteered. There were loads of parents volunteering, and there were even 2 kids there, Orla and Tim. They drove in with their bikes every Monday and Friday to cycle with us. It was really, really good. And my favourite parts are probably, we cycled down Peace Park, and it's just really fun because there's no traffic. But the traffic isn't a problem, but it's just really fun. and we only need like at least 2 adults because we have one at the front and one at the back, and just with 2 we're fine, but you know, it's better with more. But it still is, it's really good, and you know, we don't even need that many people for it. And I always look forward to Monday and Friday, and I usually would look forward at the end of the day on a Friday, you know, for just school to end. But now I see myself changing to just looking forward to the cycle at the end of the day. So it's for 4 kilometers. It only would take us like at an average of 20 minutes. So we're going fast. But this is my last year at the school, and I really do hope that there are loads of bikes around, loads of cycle buses around, but I really do hope this continues because it'd always make my week a lot better.
Dis Mariv is Misha Sean O'Hergan, Private Gaelscoil Osri i Gilchonnig, agus tá tréistal Ermaroher, Guscoil, Gachlá, Imliana, agus Anachud in the Lehan Seo, Shin Le Pashti Lom. Hi, my name is Sean O'Hergan. I'm a primary school principal in Kilkenny City, principal of Gaelscoil Osri with 451 students. I did my 100th day in a row on the bike to work last week, unfortunately different times as we all know in school, but I'm just setting off on my journey this morning. One of the most important things that I say to parents and say to children all the time is it's all about the clothes, and the old German cliche that I would often have heard in South Kerry, there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothes. Here is what I wear: a decent raincoat, a scarf, very important item in my school bag every morning is the wet trousers, and then a great present that I got a couple of years ago from a friend in school, which is a little skull cap that goes on underneath my cycling helmet. So as I say, gear is on, the raincoat is on, the scarf is on, the gloves are on a cold day. Luckily it's not raining as it is often, but at least 2 days a week I'll be joined on the road just outside my house now by a number of students. We would meet up at a local estate and along with a number of parents, particularly on a Friday, sometimes on a Wednesday as well, we make a 4-kilometre journey to school. So here I am at the entrance to Gaelscoil Osri. My bike is parked in the covered bike rack, which is a great comfort. On most days we have between 60 and 70 bikes, and on good days we have more than 100 bikes. We're really delighted to have got to over 15% of our population cycling and scooting to work every day. We're very thankful to An Taisce for granting us a new bike and scooter shelters that we will have in place very soon, hopefully. The total journey to school takes me between 8 and 9 minutes. The minimum I can do that in a car is in 15 to 16 minutes. And in the process, I feel good. I get to see the sights of a beautiful small city on my way to work every morning.
We are delighted to welcome you to our school this morning and speak to you about how we encourage our pupils to use sustainable transport coming to school. We have a number of initiatives in our school that help our pupils to use sustainable transport. These include Go Out, Cow and Saturdays, our scooter train, providing every pupil with high visibility vest as part of their uniform, providing sheltered scooter and bike parking facilities, and arranging scooter and bike training for all our pupils. We run WOW Days every Wednesday. The children are encouraged to walk, cycle or scoot to school. These children are then counted and the results are graphed. We display this graph at our weekly assemblies, and the class that has the highest number of pupils using sustainable modes of transport then wins the WOW Week. We organise bike and scooter training annually for targeted classes. This includes on-road training for our senior pupils.
In the effort to encourage our people to use sustainable transport, we set up a scooter train last year. The children on the scooter train meet every Wednesday morning in the local park and scoot in a convoy to school. We encourage our feasibility outdoors before we set it up. We ask teachers and parents to volunteer their time to run this initiative.
We enjoy entering competitions by outside agencies. Last year we won Student School of the Year and were runners-up in the One Good Idea competition. To create awareness about sustainable travel among our pupils, classes are taught lessons on topics that are targeted to their age group. We invite relevant outside agencies in to run workshops. We also participate in other projects that are relevant to the theme of sustainable travel, such as the GLOBE project and the Irish Aid Sustainable Goals competition.
For the last 2 years, we've been participating in the GLOBE project. We've conducted experiments on the weather and air quality around our school and were chosen to present at the International GLOBE Expedition in July 2018.
We thought about the barriers that we face using sustainable travel. We would like to see in the future safer, less congested bargaining, adequate space for all road users, penalties for breaking the rules being enforced by both motorists and cyclists, paths that are well maintained and places where families who live a distance away can park and then park and stride to school. We hope you have enjoyed our presentation. Thank you.
I think you can agree that there's been amazing work done by primary schools across the board here in relation to travelling more sustainable to school, and I'd like to thank all of the students who participated in the video and congratulate them on the excellent work that they're doing. They have highlighted there some future changes that they would like to address with our panel, and we'll do that later. And some of the areas that they're looking at is, you know, maintaining paths, increasing cycle lanes and less congestion on our roads, but we'll take that up with our panelists later on. So now I'd like to introduce you to a follow-up video, and this is specifically from the primary schools in Waterford and what they're doing to increase sustainable travel and also what they would like for the future. So we'll play that video there now for you.
Waterford needs some more cycle lanes for people who don't know the rules of the road when cycling. At the moment they could be very nervous, and also they could be putting themselves or the drivers in the cars in danger, not knowing the rules of the road when cycling. And another thing is also maybe even at some footpaths a bit more, because when we're out walking, I normally notice a couple of footpaths are very uneven and sometimes I trip over on them, so I think they should definitely even out some of the footpaths.
I think some of the ways that we could make it safer to school and cycle and walk to school is if we had really, really slow speed limits near the school, so that the cars weren't going as fast and it was safer for people to cycle to school and back home.
That a safer way to move about would be to close the roads passing schools while children are either coming in or out of school. That way there's less traffic and it is a safer way for children to come and leave school. I also think that if they put more bike racks around the town, that way children can go around and not have to think about where to put their bike. I think that these solutions will help people walk, scoot or cycle to school, and also help to more see people that aren't always driving around in cars. Thank you.
Again, you'll see there from the contributions of all the boys and girls that there's some amazing work being done here in Waterford by the students in our schools to improve the use of sustainable travel for schools. I think they've done an amazing job, and I want to thank them all for their contributions this morning. It's very difficult during the current pandemic and with schools closed to participate in an event like this, but we really appreciate your contributions. And I suppose some of the additional things that were raised there in Waterford were things like speed limits around school, more school buses, and also the whole idea around the whole school streets or safe recognisable zones around schools. So these are things that we'll take up with our panel as we go through today. So thank you very much, boys and girls. We really appreciate your contribution. So now I'd like to ask the audience another question. We'd like to ask you, if you're not currently walking, cycling, scooting or taking the bus to school or college, then what's your reason for this? Is it because you think maybe it's not safe enough, or that you have to travel too far, or is the weather in Ireland not something that you're comfortable cycling in, or is it that your school bag you feel is too heavy, or is it just easier to go by car? So we'd appreciate if you could click on the reason, and if we have some parents there this morning, so if you can click on the reason that's most appropriate as to why you may not be currently travelling in a sustainable mode to school, that would really be appreciated. So we'll just give you a moment or two to just to tell us what your views are there. Okay, and we might try now and see what the results are. So, okay, so the people that are not sustainably travelling, not safe, well, the highest there now is too far to the school, and then the next is that it's not safe. So too far to school, maybe that's because it's some rural schools. I know that there will be questions put to the panel later on in relation to public transport and buses to school. The idea that it's not safe, maybe that's something that we have to look at. We have to try and make it safer for our students to travel to school. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot we can do about the bad weather. And the school bags being too heavy, okay, maybe that's something we can look at, or maybe it's just being clever at what books are taken home from school on a daily basis. But it's very, very interesting, and I suppose predominantly the one there is it's too far, and we need to try and come up with solutions as to why or how we can connect to further distances from schools to allow people have a more sustainable option. So thank you very much for that. We'll close that poll now. Okay. So I'd now like to introduce you to our first speaker. It's Dr. Robert Egan. You might turn on your camera and your mic. and he's the Secondary School Development Officer with An Taisce Green Schools. And Robert is going to give us a presentation on the cycling gap in Irish secondary schools. So I'll hand over to you now, Robert. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. So I'll just check if this is working okay. Great, so hi everyone. Thanks very much for the invite for this brilliant event and for all the work that has gone to organising it. So far it's really good. I'm really enjoying it. So my name is Robbie Egan, as Rose was saying, and I'm Secondary Skills Development Officer with Green Schools Travel. And today I'm going to talk to you a bit about understanding and addressing the cycling gender gap in Irish secondary schools, which is essentially the whole aim of the Anti-Cyclist campaign. So just to begin then, a bit of introduction to Green Schools Travel. I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with it, but I'll just breeze through some of the kind of, just to introduce it a bit. So firstly, it's the fourth theme of the Green Schools programme. It's funded by DTAS and the National Transport Authority. 90% of Irish schools are registered for it, and there are 25 travel officers nationwide. And the aim overall of Green Schools Travel is to encourage students, parents and teachers to cycle, park and stride, use public transport or carpool instead of using the private car on the school run. And just in terms of some of our activities in relation to developing cycling in particular, so we roll out cycle parking. We conduct cyclability audits with students as well. Some of you may have engaged in some of them. We also have cycle right grants for primary schools in particular. Then we do a Get in Gear course for adults cycling with students. We do group cycles and engage with cycle buses as well. So just a bit about the Anti-Cyclist campaign. So some of you might be familiar with it, some of you mightn't. So I'll just go through the origins and the aims of the campaign before I talk a bit today about the research that we've been doing. So first of all, according to the Central Statistics Office data from 2016, about 2.1% of 13 to 18-year-olds frequently cycle, mainly to school. Out of this 2.1%, only 0.2% are female and 1.9% the remainder are male then. So overall then, even a very small percentage, 2.1%, only 1 in 10 of those are female. So there's a massive gender gap, it seems, particularly with teenagers cycling to school. So the aim of the Anti-Cyclist campaign is to explore, to understand and to address the gender barriers to cycling in second level. So just some of the things we've done so far with the Anti-Cyclist campaign. So you can see there, Katrina Bogle, just in the middle of that picture, she was the Secondary Skills Development Officer before, and she worked with the travel manager Jane Hackett, Rebecca Flanagan, Kira Norton and others in the organisation to develop and roll out the campaign. So one of the first things that happened was pilot focus groups with girls in Dublin schools, and what was found was there were some issues to do with stigma on cycling, some issues to do with it being uncool to cycle as a girl, and as well issues of harassment and street harassment as a cyclist. So out of this early research then, a campaign was developed. This involved a video, which we're going to show after this slide, publicity in the form of a billboard campaign, and a panel event launch, which happened in the Science Gallery, which hopefully some of you have either watched or been at. And in this panel event, you can see there the list of panelists. You had Tara Stewart, who would be a social media influencer and someone who works in media, Dr. Catherine Darker, who's a health psychologist, and then two panelists who are actually cyclists in school, one of which is an elite athlete in cycling, and another who actually cycles in as an everyday thing to school. So what this actually allowed was a kind of dialogue to happen about what causes the gender gap and what can we do to fix it, basically. And following this, then there was a nationwide rollout of panel events, but unfortunately that was cut short due to COVID. So we managed to get one in Mayo, but we actually managed to do about 13 to 14 focus groups across the country, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So just some other things then as well. We've created some research-informed interventions, one of which is the Anti-Cyclist Ambassador Programme. And at the moment, we're very proud to announce that we have 25 ambassadors to date, and they've been doing some great work on Instagram, social media, and there should be more coming in that end. So I think next is a video, is it, Rose?
How are you? Good. Lovely to meet you.
You too.
So now I know this all might look a little bit intimidating.
I used to cycle a lot. In first year when I first started, I was so self-conscious about it.
I felt like everything was like stopping me from cycling to school.
Fear of being judged by people.
Loads of the lads cycle to school.
They just see girls as like dresses and skirts and makeup, and like boys as like bikes and like athletic stuff.
Peer pressure is literally everything.
It sounds really stupid, but I really do think the helmet is such a big part of it. If you see a lad on a bike, it's not really different. You just think of it as, yeah. But like if you see a girl on a bike in her uniform or something, it's different.
I feel like you just need one person to do it.
There's nothing better than just like cycling and just seeing like the canal for me, like the whole like stretch along.
Instead of a 30-minute walk, it was like a 5-minute cycle.
I've completely got back into it.
The way you can push yourself and then after you just feel so great.
Like I don't like the fact that other girls would be like, oh, I would never get on a bike because of what they think, when like they won't ever get to experience like how it actually feels and stuff like that.
You're sweaty and you look awful, but like you just feel good about yourself.
Yesterday when I went for a cycle, I saw 2 of my old friends like on the road, and they're 2 boys, and like I saw them being like what's she doing on a bike? I didn't care. Like I gave them a big smile and waved.
Oh, people are gonna look at me, like people are gonna see me. I'm like, yeah,
you're your own person, you do you.
I think you build up this mental state of like, oh god, oh no, this lack of confidence in yourself that's probably associated with other things, and you're like, hold on, it's a bike.
So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the research. So just so this, as I was saying, this is from about 14 focus groups across the country that were carried out by travel officers in the organisation. And one of the kind of provisional, and these are just provisional themes, one of the kind of major patterns that has come out of the conversations we've had with teenage girls across the country is that cycling is mainly seen as a boys' thing. As something that's mainly just for boys, and that girls don't seem to have the same accessibility to cycling as boys, and there's generally a fear of judgment with cycling as a girl. So one of the kind of 3 main aspects of cycling as a boys thing then I'll talk about. Firstly is incompatible femininity, and I'll describe what that means, masculine performance, and then lastly gendered permission. So what you can see there at the top is just the overall kind of theme, and then underneath I'm going to talk a little bit about what the actual girls were saying in the focus groups. So incompatible femininity, what does that mean? Well, basically what I mean by incompatible femininity is that trying to be a girl and trying to meet social expectations about how to be feminine as a girl seem to be incompatible with practicing cycling in Ireland at the moment in second level for a lot of teenage girls. So just some examples here. One of the focus group participants talked about their hair. So your hair is just everywhere over the helmet, like, and you can't really fix it in school, like not properly anyway. So you're kind of just walking around all day with your hair just like sticking up everywhere. So you can see here this particular participant sees an issue with cycling in, having long hair, and as well maybe the expectation to have long hair for some girls that they experience, and then the kind of the sweatiness or cycling with a helmet messing up this kind of cultivated look of having your hair in a certain way coming into school, and then not having the facilities then to fix it when you're coming in. So you can see one problem there in terms of the incompatibility between cycling and then also trying to maintain certain expectations of what you're meant to look like as a girl. So next then, I don't think a lot of girls in school would choose to wear trousers instead of the skirt just so they could cycle to school. And it's probably too much hassle to come in not wearing a skirt because you'd have to change. I think you would probably have to come in earlier to get changed. So I think it's kind of unnecessary. So you can see here, this particular participant brings up the issue of wearing trousers and cycling in, and also contrasts that with wearing a skirt and cycling in and the problems with both. So this is something that's often brought up in relation to cycling, the issue to do with uniforms. But you can see here that there's actually some problems there as well. That even if you have the choice to wear trousers, some people won't wear it because they feel like they won't look very feminine, or they won't feel like a girl if they wear them. They'll feel like more like a boy wearing trousers. So there's kind of a complexity there between cycling in and the nuisance of wearing a skirt or having to change from trousers to a skirt, and then also the expectation to feel like you should be wearing a skirt as a girl. So just a little bit more here then as well. I think that like it's more like me, because if I was to cycle on a bike, I think I would be self-conscious of how it looks, because it looks very awkward if you're cycling in a skirt, like. So you can see here, and the word self-conscious, I'd say a lot of people resonate with that feeling of feeling self-conscious if you're cycling as a girl. Whereas for boys, maybe sometimes it's considered second nature. It's considered nothing to comment on or think about. It's just unremarkable. So yeah, this particular participant talks about how she feels like she looks very awkward cycling in a skirt. So once again, you can see the problem, that you don't feel like you should be wearing trousers because it might seem a bit masculine. But then if you're wearing a skirt and trying to look more feminine, it's actually very awkward. So you feel like it's a kind of dilemma about how to cycle in a way that still feels like you're meeting feminine expectations. You'll be kind of like sweaty and you'll be like not clean, and it will kind of like not ruin your day, but it will kind of be like you'd be wearing your high vis, your helmet, you'd probably be wearing your raincoat, and like you wouldn't be able to wear your skirt. It'd just be like ugly. You kind of look different, like strange. So once again, this idea of wearing kind of cycle apparel and cycling into school, maybe it just doesn't look in a way that meets feminine expectations or expectations of how you should look as a girl. And this leads to self-consciousness, and it leads as well to a sense that cycling is a boys thing, and it stays a boys thing. So just one more then to do with incompatible femininity. I think that it's a masculine thing. Why? Stereotypes, I suppose. It looks cool on boys. Sometimes older people tell me, oh, that's not ladylike. And that kind of puts it into your head, I have to act like a lady. And then you get put into those stereotypes automatically. And then it gets hard to get out of it and to do things you're not stereotyped to do. So I think this participant very eloquently gives an example of how there's certain expectations to be feminine as a girl, or to act in ways that are coded as feminine. And then you get put into these kind of stereotypes, and it's hard to break free of them then. And that's kind of part of the problem of why cycling stays and is socially defined as a boys thing for girls. So just a little bit more. So on the one hand, cycling can be seen as a boys thing because it's incompatible with social expectations regarding femininity. In another sense, then, cycling can be seen as an actual performance of being a boy or masculinity. So I'm just going to give you some examples once again from some of the girls in the focus groups of how they perceive cycling. I feel like it's just like certain stuff gets pushed towards certain genders when you get to a certain age. So like that was more like so pushed towards the fellas, cycling she's talking about. But like certain other stuff that's considered more feminine is pushed toward the females. So like that's something like everyone did it in primary, but the minute you get to this age, that's more of a fellas thing. So that's moving from primary to secondary school. But that's just literally society. Same with like you wouldn't really see a fella doing his hair in the morning, doing his makeup every morning. There is people who do that, but like that is something more that was more pushed towards like girls. While like other stuff was was pushed towards like sports and stuff was pushed towards fellas. And you can even see that as well in the video, which hopefully you can watch afterwards as well or have watched before. This idea that girls have things and boys have things, and that girls should engage in girls things and boys should engage in boys things. And cycling once again is continually created and constructed as a boys thing, and is seen as kind of a natural thing that boys do or is pushed towards boys as well. Like people say like dancing would be more like a girls type of thing, and then like cycling and football would be more of a fellas type of thing. Like as well, if you see a girl like, you know, doing football or something, people would be like giving the eyes and all. So I think it's just, so you can see here as well that idea of the eyes and all, and then going back to self-consciousness. I'd imagine maybe some of you who are girls who cycle to school or do cycle to school might sometimes feel that, might feel like you're being looked at, might feel that you're being judged. So whereas if you're a boy, it's not even something worth looking at, it's not even something worth commenting on. So once again, this problem of where does the gender gap come from? Well, it seems like parts of it have to do with social expectations to do with gender. So just the very last one then is gendered permission. So this is just some of the things that participants brought up in terms of how they were permitted to do things, maybe, but not definitely different to boys. So has everyone not gone cycling because their mom or dad was like, wear a helmet, and you just didn't go? So that's one example there of having, like, I suppose, mandatory helmet use, cycling to school. So I live close enough to cycle to school, but I don't because my skirt and everything will get in the way of pedals. It's dangerous cycling when you're wearing a skirt. You could get caught or something. And then the participant, the facilitator asks, can you wear trousers there? No. So you can see there, like earlier I was talking about the uniform, and how you can have issues of even having the choice to wear trousers, but it not being seen as a feminine thing, so not being used. But then on the other hand as well, there may be a permission not to wear trousers at all. And some people find that can stop them from cycling. So just a little bit about what we've been trying to do collectively then to tackle the gender gap. So we've set up the Anti-Cycles Ambassador campaign or program. And the aim of this is to take action to enable and empower teenage girls to cycle to school. As opposed to purely encourage, it's important to actually create the conditions where you can enable and empower teenage girls to cycle to school. So some of the objectives. So number 1, to develop role models and leaders for school cycling amongst teenage girls. Number 2, empower teenage girls to shape the cycle friendliness of their institutions. And number 3, provide opportunities for teenage girls to cycle. And that's what I'll conclude with. Thanks very much.
So we had a question that came in. So what, in your opinion, should be done by students and staff to encourage teenage girls cycling?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so I'd have 3 simple suggestions, I think, in relation to that. And just to flag as well, all the findings so far are provisional, so that the research is ongoing. So yeah, firstly, I would say recognize that there's an issue. There is an issue with the gender gap. There are genuine social and material barriers for teenage girls cycling, and it's not as accessible as it is for boys. So that should be the first thing. It is recognize that it's an issue that needs to go beyond encouragement and needs to go toward enablement and empowerment. Secondly, I would say consider what needs to be done in a collaborative and participatory way with students, teachers and others involved, including parents. And thirdly then, I would say take action in the same spirit of collaboration and participation between young people and staff and older people as well to make the changes that need to happen. And there is as well that consideration that different contexts may have different problems. So there is a need to consider local circumstances and take action in that respect. So they'd be my 3 suggestions overall.
Okay, thank you. Some really good points there, and I think I'm certainly a lot more conscious now of making sure my daughter gets on her bike more often. Try and start them. Okay, thanks very much, Robert. So at this point, I think we're going to move on to our first panel discussion. So I'm going to invite all of our panel members who are going to be involved in the discussion to turn on their cameras. But just to avoid feedback, I'd ask you to keep your mics on mute until you're asked a question directly, or unless you want to join in the conversation, just to let me know. Okay, so I see everybody has joined us there. Thank you very much. Okay, so just to remind you, if we can keep just in mindful of time, we can keep the answers to around the 2-minute mark, if possible. So we'll try and get through as many questions as we can. Okay, so my first question is to Jane, who's joining us from Antashka Green Schools. And Jane, my question for you is, my mum cannot cycle. Is there a way she could get some cycle training to be more confident and to cycle with my brother and me to school every day like our friends?
That's a great question. So what I'd say is yes, your mum can learn to cycle again. Maybe she hasn't cycled since she was, a teenager or a young person. So she can cycle again. First of all, she needs to maybe do a small course. Green Schools run courses in schools. It's called the Get in Gear course, and it's a free course, and it's only a 2-hour course. So your mum can definitely do that. What I'd also say is she might be interested in looking up the Cycling Ireland network. There's a lot of really good courses that Cycling Ireland run. They run a kind of longer course, which is the Cycle Right course. So if she's really keen, she might do that. I'd also say she should go to the Green Schools website on our YouTube page. We have loads of tips and videos all about, number one, about her, how she can gain confidence back on her bike, and also how she can cycle with her kids. And that's really important, the correct positioning on the road and how she can feel comfortable cycling with her kids. And as a mother who cycles with her kids, the big thing is also get out cycling with your friends. If you have other mothers who do cycle, buddy up with them, and maybe at the weekend get a bit of confidence so that you can get the kids back on the bike and bring them to school on a Monday.
There's some really good points there and stuff I'm going to take on board myself. I don't know about anybody everybody else here listening. Thank you very much for that, Jane. My next question is for Leona, who's joining us from the Department of Education. So, Leona, the question for you is, do you think the primary and secondary school core curriculum in the future could incorporate more climate education? So examples here are weather experiments in science, graphs on sustainable transport in maths, or things like climate education in geography.
Thank you very much. You probably know that we have a national strategy on education for sustainable development, or ESD as we call it, and significant work has been underway since 2014, since that strategy was published. So one of the things that we have done has been to integrate sustainable development into the curriculum at all levels and across all subject areas. And this work continues as new curricula are developed and as old curricula are redeveloped. So the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, the NCCA, carried out an audit of the curriculum, and they published their report in 2018. And that demonstrates the opportunities and linkages to ESD in the curriculum across all the levels. A report is available, and I think you're going to put that up in the chat if anybody wants to have a look at it in more detail. So another thing we have done under the strategy is to include in the teacher training criteria ESD. So that's now a mandatory element in all teacher training programs. There's a significant range of resources available also for teachers on how they can include ESD in their teaching and learning. So the foundations are there, they've already been laid. So we just need now to ensure that teachers are looking at ESD in their subjects in the classroom. So we want to raise awareness about that for teachers, and we also plan, the department's inspectors plan to examine how ESD is delivered in the classroom. That will be carried out as soon as classrooms are back open. We're also, I just wanted to mention, looking at our new strategy. The current strategy came to an end at the end of 2020. So we're looking at the development of our new ESD strategy. And again, once schools are reopened, we hope to hold a public consultation process. Details will be available on our website, and we hope that people will engage with the process and give us your ideas of what more we can do in terms of ESD in the classroom. So thank you very much.
That's great. Thanks, Leona. We look forward to that public consultation coming out, so we'll keep an eye on the website for that. And just as Leona had said, we have uploaded the link to the NCCA study on education for sustainable development, and you see that in your control panel on the right in the chat function. And if anybody's any issues accessing that, just let us know. We can forward on the link to you. Okay, so Rachel, my next question is to you, and Rachel is joining us from Transport Infrastructure Ireland, and also as author, as we had said, of Travelling in a Woman's Shoes, July 2020. I'm intrigued, Rachel, I'll have to look that up afterwards. So my question to you is, as a female, I would like to cycle to school, but it does not feel safe. How can we ensure female students feel safer cycling to school in the future? I think that's a really important question.
Hi, Karen and all the panelists, and good morning to everybody who is listening to us this morning, and thank you very much for this for inviting me to be here today. It's been an amazing morning so far, and I have to say I've learned more this morning myself than I have probably doing my normal day today. So it's been a real pleasure listening to the school children from around Waterford, really and truly. To be honest, I mean, I think all the barriers to girls cycling to school have come through in Robert's presentation. And I was really taken with what Robert said towards the end about acknowledging that this is a real issue, and really to try and move from that acknowledgement. So even to acknowledge it is the first step, and that is, it might sound really obvious, but it is so important. And then moving from that acknowledgement into empowering and enabling young girls to cycle. The interesting thing to me was, when we were doing the research for Travelling in a Woman's Shoes, we were talking to women in a very similar way to some of the interviews that were in the video, Anti-Cycles. But we were looking at women from their 20s right up to their 60s. So a lot of the barriers to things like cycling that were in that age group, you can see the same barrier. It starts from a very young age. So travel perceptions and perceptions around safety and those travel habits, they form in primary school and on into secondary school. And I thought that was really interesting just to see that as we get older, our views from primary school really hold. In terms of how can we ensure safer cycling, it's really safer cycling for everybody. Obviously, being segregated from traffic is the most important thing, and that is something that I can see, you know, is happening. And I see my colleague from the National Transport Authority is part of the panelist today, so I'm sure, Robert, you'll have a lot to talk about that in terms of just trying to ensure the separation from traffic. The one thing that I was going to bring today as well, but it's already been spoken about, the importance of training. And it sounds really, you know, obvious again, but it's really important. And this came through in our research for when we were doing the Travelling in a Woman's Shoes. That came up time and time again. Training for cycling on roads and cycling with traffic, and cycling on both a quiet road and training for cycling on a busy road. Well, I was going to point to a lot of work in this area, Transport for London. We engaged them a lot over a lot of our work, but they have online training, and they had, you know, training for children. But I can see we have our own program here through, and Jane mentioned it earlier. So I think that's a really big thing. So I think there's three things there for me. It's segregated cycling, it's the training, and not to be afraid of the training, and also the acknowledgement that this is something that really we have to try and empower and enable. And I thought Robert's presentation was fantastic. So thank you.
That's great. Thanks for that, Rachel. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm moving on quite quickly, but again, I'm just conscious of getting through the questions, given everyone their time. So Fergus, who's joining us from Waterford City and County Council. So Fergus, my question to you is, I go to Whitechurch National School and there is an 80-kilometre speed limit outside our school. Are the council going to look into reducing speed limits outside schools in Waterford? And I'm sure this is an issue probably across the country, so it'll be interesting to get the take here.
Okay, thanks for that, Karen. And before I answer that question, I might just add to the training piece that the other two panelists spoke about there in the last couple of minutes. The council also, through its sports partnership body, has been running adult back to cycling courses for the last couple of years as well during the spring and summertime. Again, that's another resource. Obviously with COVID that mightn't be happening as much at the moment, but it's another resource just to keep an eye out for, because they were specifically aimed at, I know some of the courses in recent years were aimed at particularly at getting women, I suppose, in particular back to cycling. Again, it's just another resource that's available there. With respect to Whitechurch National School, the short answer is yes. I mean, the council has done a lot of work over the last couple of years in reducing speed limits outside schools. We put in measures like variable time speed limits, where we reduce using digital panels, we reduce the speed limit outside schools from 50 or 80 or whatever kilometers per hour down to 30 kilometers per hour for the periods of time that the school is opening and closing, when there are people transiting to and from school. We'll be doing it again. We'll review our special speed limits every few years. The last time we did it was in 2018. We'll be starting that process again this year, and we'll keep Whitechurch in mind. But what I suppose I would say, and it's very important, is that the school from Whitechurch should make contact with us and just make us aware of that particular issue. And no harm, I think, if we got some support in that from probably the school principal, maybe the Parents Association or whatever. So I think it's important just to keep that on our agenda. But we will be going through a public consultation process later on this year on special speed limits. And if there are issues out there where there are still excessive speed limits outside schools, we'll be very happy to address them.
That's great. Thanks, Fergus. That's great to know. Okay, so my next question then I'm going to be directing to Deputy Mark O'Cahasey, who, just to remind you, is spokesperson for social protection with the Green Party. So Mark, my question for you is, do you think it would be a good idea for Waterford to provide a free park and cycle facility on the Dunmore Road, Cork Road, Tramore Road and Ferrybank, whereby parents could drop school children and they would join a cycle train from here to their school with parental supervision?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Karen. And I suppose probably more importantly than any of my political experience, I was a school teacher for 15 years in Glornamara, and I heard Oni and Nia and Alice's voices there coming from 6th class. I taught them in 1st class, so it was lovely to hear them and maybe hear a little bit of the Green Party brainwashing coming through on it as well with their interest in cycling. Park and ride facilities are all fine and well, and putting the responsibility on parents then to ferry them to and from, and then to provide safety on the way. But really what you want is independent mobility for kids. You want kids to feel safe to make those journeys on their own. And really what you're looking at there, so the Dunmore Road is a perfect example. You could set up a park and ride facility at the Woodlands Hotel, all you wanted, but that Dunmore Road section is still dangerous. And you're going to feel, I'm a competent cyclist, I've cycled all my life, I've cycled in sports clubs, triathlons, all the rest of it, and I still feel like I'm taking my life in my hands in the Dunmore Road. So what you need is safe, segregated infrastructure, so that you, like the Danish example is that whenever cycle infrastructure design is put in front of people, the engineers are asked, would you put your 8-year-old on that? And if the answer is no, you go back to the design board. Now I'm acutely conscious of that because I have an 8-year-old that I cycle across the school in Glornamara any of the days that I'm not in Dublin. And I ferry him across and I cycle alongside him, and I really want to teach him about active and sustainable transport and all those health benefits that go with it. But really what we want, and Fergus is plagued with me asking for this, is safe, segregated cycle infrastructure on the ring road so that I don't have to ferry him, particularly as they get older, as they're 10. And I believe that we should be identifying those places within our towns where children want to go. So that will be the schools, the GAA clubs, the AFCs, and we should be identifying those and saying, okay, how do we allow our children to make that choice independently so that their parents as well feel quite safe and secure about leaving them out the door? Off you go. I fancy going down to the GAA club. Great. Out you go. Really interesting research from Robbie there, and it sounds almost semi-insulting, but one of the terms that's used for female cyclists is an indicator species. If you see a lot of women on bikes, it gives you a good indication that you have a safe cycling culture. You have good quality infrastructure and the culture around it. You're not dealing with those harassment issues, any of those things. And it's sad to see the movement from, if you go back to the suffragettes used to call bicycles freedom machines because they gave such independence and mobility to women at a time that they previously didn't have that. So we really need to work on that. So anyway, I've gone around the houses there, but that kind of park and ride facility and throwing the responsibility back on parents to provide a safety blanket, that's fine and well and possibly as an interim measure, but really we should be working on our children's independent mobility, that a child should feel safe, particularly a child from 10 up, should feel safe to navigate their own environment under their own steam. And to do that, we need to give them safe, segregated cycle infrastructure, and that's the way to go.
Okay, thanks. Some good points made there, Mark. Thank you. And I'm sure it's something that will be discussed further in the future. Okay, so my next question is for Robert Parkinson, who's joined us from the National Transport Authority. So, Robert, the question for you is, can we have a network of segregated cycle lanes in Waterford City to improve the safety of children cycling to school as part of the Waterford Metropolitan Area Transport Strategy?
Well, the short answer is yes. There's a bit more nuance to it than that. Segregated cycle infrastructure, as Mark and Rachel have already said, is a very important part of the network. But I suppose we would see cycling as happening on every street, every residential road in cul-de-sac and all the the small local streets. We don't necessarily need segregation everywhere, but we do need segregation where there's traffic and big traffic, and a lot of schools are sometimes located in places like that. So it's going to be a key part of WMATS for sure, absolutely.
Okay, that's great. Okay, well, thank you for that. And then our final question for me for the moment is to Dominic, who is the Regional Planning Officer here with us in the Southern Region Assembly. So Dominic, what we want to know is, how does the Southern Regional Assembly support active and sustainable travel in Waterford and the region?
Hi everybody, and thanks Karen, and thanks for the invitation to take part today. I suppose that the Southern Regional Assembly has two main roles that impact transport and transport policy. And one is the managing of EU projects to develop models of good practice with other EU regions and cities, such as the Match-Up project that we're featuring today, supporting sustainable transport modes. But secondly, as the regional tier of government responsible for regional planning policy, the region has adopted a new regional strategy called the RESIS for the Southern Region. And this strategy sets the framework for sustainable transport and connectivity across the region, and supports a wide range of projects from road, rail and public transport and improvements to port facilities, right down to policy support for local transport plans, greenways, improved accessibility within cities, towns and neighbourhoods. And one example is the policy for the 10-minute city and town, which is part of our regional strategy, where the aim is to provide a range of community facilities and services that are accessible by walking and cycling within 10 minutes. And this can require new connections to be created between residential areas or upgrading existing footpaths so that they can become safer and more user-friendly. So our role at regional level, therefore, is to support the local authorities and other partners such as the NTA to take action on the ground and improve how we can move around our city or town. Thanks, Karen.
Great, thanks, Dominic. I see, Rose, I'm going to pass you over to
this panel. I'd like to kick off another question for our audience today. I'd like to ask you how you'd like to travel to school or college into the future. So, looking down the line, if we put the necessary infrastructure in place, what can we do? And if we manage to make it safer and more convenient, would your preferred mode of transport be walking, cycling, scooting, taking the bus or train, or would you still want to travel by car to school or college? And if I could ask everyone to click on which is the most appropriate answer for how you would like to travel to school in the future. And you might just click on that now and we'll see what everybody is responding on. So we might close that now. Okay, so that's really, really interesting. So the vast majority of people, given the choice and with better infrastructure in place, would choose to cycle. So 67% would choose to cycle, 25% walk, scoot and bus, there's no response there, and 8% would still like to travel to school or college by car. Okay, so look, 8% is not a whole lot. If the vast majority want to walk and cycle, then I suppose there's an onus on us to try and do what we can to improve the infrastructure so that more people actually take that option into the future. So thank you very much for that. So we'll close out of that poll. And I'd like to now introduce you to our next guest speaker. It's Katrina Kaur, who is a PhD researcher with the School of Health Behaviour Research in Waterford Institute of Technology. And she's going to share with you her research and findings to see if schools can lead the way on sustainable transport into the future. So I'll hand over to you now, Katrina.
Thank you very much, Rose, and a fantastic event, great to be part of. And it's really wonderful, I think, to see so many different disciplines represented here today. So I wanted to share my experience of some of the research that I've been doing in cycling in Irish towns, but particularly looking at schools, and partially because, first of all, I think by focusing on young people, we're actually investing in the future. And secondly, schools are a great generator of short journeys. So if we're looking about changing behaviour, we know that one of the things that's hugely important is addressing the short journeys. So as Rose mentioned, I'm doing my PhD in WIT. That's with Niamh Murphy and Barry Lamb, who've been working in active transport and smarter travel for quite a long period of time, and it's co-funded by Kilkenny County Council, so I'm working very closely with Kilkenny County Council. And I suppose why the urgency? Because this work has been ongoing for a while in Kilkenny. Sorry, now I'm just skipping through some slides there. I'll go back here. So why the urgency now? As we know, this work has been happening in Kilkenny since about 2009 when the Smarter Travel Initiative started. But what we can see if we look at our greenhouse gas emissions, if we look at the red line there, that's our transport emissions, and the transport emissions have been rising steadily and are now make up a much greater share of our carbon dioxide emissions. So if we look at the graph starts from 1990, and we can see there's a very steep rise in the transport emissions, up until I suppose around 2007, and then we see it starting to go back downwards for the which was due to the recession, and it's starting to creep back up again, and this is even with a greater share of electric vehicles. So we know that electric vehicles are not going to be the answer to our greenhouse gas emissions. So we need to start looking at active travel. When we look at schools in particular, when we look at schools in particular, we can see from 1996, over 40% of secondary school students used to cycle to school in Kilkenny. So now those percentages are slightly higher than the national average, but it's just over 3% in Kilkenny. And like Robert said, there's way more boys cycling than girls as well. And this about corresponds to the rise in cars. So why active travel? As we said, one of the huge benefits of active travel is that as well as reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, there's huge health benefits. And that has been mentioned by many of the parents and the children in the videos earlier on. So I think children and adults are aware of this, and it's about giving people the opportunity to experience it. We know there's a huge economic cost to rising physical inactivity. We know that some of the health benefits include cardiovascular and metabolic health, healthy bones and muscle development, better concentration spans and academic performance, which is important for school, overall life satisfaction, and reduced feelings of anxiety and depression, and improved quality of life and sleep. And as some of the parents summed up in the earlier videos, it's just a fantastic way for children to start their day. One of the things that we can't forget about is the air pollution, particularly around schools with idling cars. So we actually have a huge problem in Ireland with respiratory diseases, and it leads to 1 in 5 deaths in Ireland and 14.3% of all inpatient hospitalisations. And this is even higher for emergency hospitalisations. We have one of the highest rates of asthma in the world, so 21.5% of our children and 79.4% of our adults. Because asthma starts early in life, it has a high lifetime burden as well, so it's something that we live with for our life. So if we look at these two pictures here, what environment do we want our children to experience on their way to school? I think that's not all. There's lots of other benefits with active travel as well. First of all, active travel is free, so sometimes we forget about the percentage of people that don't have cars and about the car dependent and people that are sometimes forced into owning cars because there is no other options. So active travel is free, it's low cost. It's also accessible, and this is a photograph here of one of the parents going to the Gaelscoil, where we met Sean O'Harrigan, the principal there earlier in one of the videos, and he has a motorised wheelchair, but he accompanies his children to school every day on their bikes or on the days that they cycle, and that's what I mean by it's accessible. So our environment is much more accessible. Active travel can be integrated into our daily lives, so it's not another burden, it's part of, it just becomes part of our lives. There's more time in the outdoors. It allows us to reclaim the streets so that the streets are for people rather than thoroughfares for cars. And this allows us to build communities. What we do is we meet people on the way to school, we talk to people, and there's lots of opportunity for connections. So what can we do then if we're looking at schools? Well, as I suppose, as spoken about earlier by Sean, we had some schools in Kilkenny that were leading the way with cycling, and we had other schools who identified real issues. And we had one school in particular, St. Canice's Primary School, one of the largest primary schools in Kilkenny, who were situated between two very busy roads. And they had identified a huge problem in their school, and surveys with the students found that they just did not feel safe enough. So we needed to get everyone together to address this problem, because this wasn't a problem that the school can address on their own. So yes, we needed the school, we needed the interest from the school, the board of management, the principal, the Green Schools team, the parents associations, but we also needed the Kilkenny County Council, we needed Garda Síochána, we needed our volunteers. The NTA were very supportive, and I explained some of the roles of these people as I go through it. And we also, surprisingly enough, needed to bring on board Kilkenny Agricultural Society. So, as I said, the problem that they identified was the lack of space for walking and cycling. Because the school was situated between these two busy roads, there's a huge amount of car traffic. So this was the circle that they identified, that because there was increasing number of cars, this vicious circle was happening on the school grounds. The more cars that were there, the less people walked and cycled, causing more cars and increased car dependency and a fear of walking or cycling. So we actually needed to make space, first of all, to allow people to walk or cycle. So we developed a little communication campaign, and some of you may be familiar with Cartoon Saloon, who are an Oscar-nominated animation company in Kilkenny. And this is their little characters there, Dorg Fandango on his bike. So we created these signs for outside the school gate, please do not park here. But what was a crucial part of it is we did need to find a solution for people who were travelling that bit further or who needed to bring their cars to school. So with that, then we created a park and stride zone, and that's where the Kilkenny Agricultural Society came in, because they owned land quite close to the school, maybe 200-300 metres from the school, that contained plain pitches but had empty car parking spaces during the day, and they worked very closely with us to allow this to be used as a park and stride. So then we produced our map for the school, and if you can see the little green zone in the map, so the green is the ped shed, which is a 1 kilometre area around the school, and the NTA produced this for the school, that this is, so the message going home to the parents and to the students was that if you lived inside the ped shed, please walk or cycle to school. And then if you live outside the ped shed, please park away from the school, use the park and stride, and then walk or scoot or cycle the rest of the distance to school. So this was actually a message that was quite strong, and I think the children really liked this message. If you live outside, if you live inside the green area, you have to walk and cycle to school as much as you can. And I think it's very important that children have the facts as well when they're children and parents when they're making the decisions. So this, I suppose, then is some of the little success stories that we had here. So there was huge engagement from the parents, and the walking and cycling to school was really promoted by the school and taken on board. But the park and stride was probably critical in this case. But something else then, if you look at those photographs as well, you can see that in some cases the footpath is quite narrow, and there is a cycle lane there. There's only a white painted line on the road. So this led to some further problems here. So if we look at our next little photograph here, this was a photograph of the school in the mornings. So unfortunately the white cycle lanes didn't mean a whole lot to motorists. So to counteract that, then we actually Kilkenny Cycling and Walking Campaign came on board, and we actually got guarded traffic cones, and we started off with a trial which lasted for about 6 weeks of actually coning off the cycle lane outside the school. And the effect, that was so effective that the council then came on board and they installed the temporary bollards outside the school. So if you look at the bollards on the top of the picture, unfortunately we don't have those in Kilkenny, but they're installed in some of the schools around Dublin, and they send a very strong message that this is a children's area. So going forward, that's the type of segregation that we would like to see outside of the schools in Kilkenny, and it does create that safe school zone, and that's exactly what we were looking for. We didn't have the option of school streets, which was mentioned earlier, which is a full street closure, but we definitely wanted to focus on creating that safe school zone. So I suppose some of the key learnings, the first thing was that we needed to reduce the traffic in the school environment before we could promote walking and cycling. The second thing was that we wanted to engage people early, so to explain why, to ask for cooperation from the parents and the students. We needed the engineering teams involved. We needed to explain the concept of the school streets, in this case the school zones. Traffic calming is really important, demarcation, so people know that they're coming into a zone for children, and lots and lots of encouragement, signage, volunteers, and then some challenges to encourage children to cycle to school. As I said, we did also have to use enforcement, Garda cones, volunteers in high vis, and then eventually the bollards and actually some light segregation. Unfortunately, with the secondary schools, they, when the surveys were conducted, the traffic again was given as a main reason, but it was a huge challenge at the time was the weight of the school bags. So I know with COVID people had limited access to lockers, but it was certainly identified as an issue among secondary schools that there's limited locker space anyway, or limited storage space. So even if they are cycling to school, there isn't the same storage space for cycle helmets, any cycling gear, wet gear, and the heavy bags is an obstacle as well. So like Rob's presentation as well, there's a lot of issues to be explored in the secondary schools, but I think if we don't have the infrastructure and the support in place in the secondary schools, such as the parking, additional storage and showers, it's probably a prerequisite for a lot of the schools. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present.
Katrina, thank you very much for that. That was really, really interesting, and I suppose it's the alternative to what we see one of the areas in your presentation there to the school street, this whole recognisable safe zone around a school. And I had actually seen there, I think the first one in Dublin was Francis Street CBS, but they put in the actual pencil bollards, and they also put in on the pavement yellow and red dots, circular dots, all around the school, so that the very minute a motorist arrived at the location, it became very, very obvious that this was a safe, recognisable zone for schools. Is that something that you think we should be trying to create for our schools into the future?
Yeah, I do think we need zones outside our schools. We need very recognisable zones outside the school. The safe streets, the school streets is ideal, and if that works for some schools, that's a fantastic way to go, because it gives the children a great opportunity to mingle as well on their way to school, and those social connections, which then becomes a huge part of encouraging the active travel behaviour. In the absence of having school streets, I think the safe school zones are the next best thing we can. And marking that safe school zone as a children's area is hugely important. So I know in the coloured dots on the road were one of the ways that they went up in Dublin. Even the raised ramps to slow the traffic, the speed signs, the speed limit signs on the way to school. And I think what we'd like to go with in Kilkenny then is we'd like to use Dorg Van Dango and our characters from Cartoon Saloon as well to mark it as a child-friendly area. And it also gives an opportunity for greening the environment around the school, which can then tie into other curriculum links in the school, including biodiversity and other links like that. So the idea of creating a safe school zone is crucial, but we also have to remember that the routes to school are only as good as their weakest link. So we have to look at the routes from the schools to the residential areas and identify the big hazards or any severance points that are there for the children, get that information to the council and to get those issues addressed.
Thank you very much for that, Katrina. Much appreciated for your time today. Very interesting and something for us to all think about. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker now. And our next speaker is Dylan Power. He is a PhD researcher in the School of Health Behaviour Science at Waterford Institute of Technology. And he's going to share with us his research and findings on the use of system maps for sustainable transport. So I'll hand over to you now, Dylan. Thank you very much.
Okay, hopefully you can all hear me. I'm just going to make sure that I can change the slides here. Perfect. Okay, so first of all, thanks very much for Rose for the invitation to come and speak today, and thanks to Robbie and Katrina for giving great talks before me. This definitely isn't the best to last. So what I'm hoping to do over the next 15 minutes or so is just touch on some of the work that I've conducted and some of the international literature around systems maps, and really kind of give a bit of a flavour in terms of how it could potentially be, or how they could be potentially used to explore the system of sustainable transport in Waterford, but more specifically how systems maps can be used then to identify some solutions that exist within the system for young people. So just a little bit about me. I'm a PhD student in WIT, same as Katrina, and my PhD is co-funded by Get Ireland Walking and by WIT. For those of you who are aware of Get Ireland Walking and what they do, they're a national organisation with the kind of overall vision of creating a culture of walking in Ireland. So kind of written on paper, it's a fairly simple vision, but it's a really, really complex problem. And this idea of addressing complex problems and how we approach and address them is something that I'm hoping to touch on throughout the next 15 minutes or so. So what I'm hoping to touch on over the course of the presentation really is just give a bit of an insight into what it could potentially mean to think in a systems-based way and ultimately approach the problem of sustainable transport and other complex problems from a systems perspective, and then give an insight into how we can visualize them and conceptualize these problems through systems maps. So I'll illustrate my point then through some international examples from the literature and then some of the work that I conducted myself in County Cork here in Ireland. And finally, I'm just going to leave you with some learnings that I feel Waterford could take on board if it was something that they were to pursue in terms of developing a systems map for walking or cycling in Waterford. So we might start with just the problem of walking in particular. I'm going to go back a slide there, they're jumping. So walking is something that's made up of a lot of different factors in terms of there's lots of different things at play when we talk about how much people walk. And these factors kind of exist at different levels of the system, kind of individual level factors like biology and psychology, all the way up to, you know, geographic factors, how hilly is an area, how close do people live to the shops, pharmacy, etc. And then infrastructure is another factor. So all of these are kind of factors that are at play when we talk about how much people walk. And the traditional way in which we would have approached these problems through research is quite a linear way. And the way that they appear on that slide there in terms of each factor is separate and they're not connected or related to each other is kind of the way we traditionally would have approached it. So I'll use the example of raw spaghetti to kind of illustrate my point of our traditional way of viewing and approaching our problems, insofar as that our traditional lens that we viewed our problems were quite linear, and we really employed a cause and effect type model, and we worked in our silos to address these problems, and we took out each individual strand of spaghetti, each factor that influences a problem, and analysed it to within an inch of its life, and not really took into consideration that it's the whole packet of spaghetti, the whole system that creates a problem. And we now know that this way of looking at our problems, this way of researching complex problems such as obesity, physical activity, isn't working. If we look at physical activity specifically, the amount of money and funding that has gone into physical activity research over the last 30 or so years has gone up, but we haven't really seen the population level behaviour change that would reflect the amount of money and the amount of effort we pumped into it. So researchers now are calling on a new way of looking at our problems and a new way of approaching these problems, and they're called systems approaches. So let's take into consideration the same problem, walking, same factors, but let's start acknowledging that in some way, shape or form, whether empirically or theoretically, that some of the factors are interdependent and interconnected. And not only that, but the organizations who work within this system on these factors, their work, their policies, their strategies are interrelated. And the whole premise of a systems approach is that it takes effort from all areas of the system to see sustained change. So rather than looking at a problem as raw spaghetti, the way a problem could be conceptualized through a systems lens would be as cooked spaghetti. So rather than talking about the analysis of and really trying to gain the most robust scientific evidence for each individual factor, it's about synthesizing what we have and the interconnectedness of the factors and the relationships between organizations and between factors that that add up to a problem, and the networks of organizations within the system. So it's a little bit of a more messy look at the problem, but I think some of you will agree it's probably more of a realistic view on how these problems actually manifest themselves in reality. So researchers are now taking this way of looking at problems, and they're left with the kind of first step of how do they make sense of it, what do they do to make sense of it. Well, systems maps is where come in here in terms of how they are used to visualize and conceptualize problems. And I'm just going to pull up some examples of systems maps here. So this is an example of for a systems map for physical activity at the local level in England. There's an example for obesity at the local level in Australia. There's another example of physical activity more broadly at the conceptual level. And then finally, there's an example of obesity, which was developed by Foresight. And this is kind of the jewel in the systems map crown, really. It's very, very complex and it's very overwhelming upon first look. And it kind of looks like that bowl of spaghetti that I had a couple of slides ago. But what these systems maps are is that they're a product of discussions between interdisciplinary stakeholders who work on a particular problem. So if we take the problem of this particular one here, which was physical activity for the local level in England, who would be involved in that, or who was involved in this study and the development of this map, were the usual suspects if you think about physical activity promotion at the local level. So the equivalent of the local sports partnerships in that area, the local authorities. But really, to get a holistic perspective on the system of physical activity, the researchers who developed this particular map started to identify stakeholders who may have an indirect role in the promotion of physical activity. So that might be planners, developers, people who work in urban design. And the purpose of these discussions is not really to develop the map itself. The mapping process is the catalyst and is the important part. And they're not arts and crafts activities. The purpose of these types of systems maps is actually to identify actionable outcomes for the system to take on board. So if we talk about identifying gaps, this particular systems map and the discussions that took place around data and evidence, the stakeholders themselves were able to identify areas within the system that there was data existing, whether it was through programs or whether it was through footfall counts, but they were also able to identify areas within the system of physical activity in that local area that needed more data. And as well as that, the stakeholders themselves could kind of pick out where they fit within that systems map as well. So it's a really iterative, dynamic process, but it allows stakeholders to kind of gain a new perspective. So those were examples of the international literature and some of the work that's been done abroad in relation to developing systems maps for public health problems. But what I did over the summer was developed one of these maps for walking in County Cork. So when I started off this research project, I kind of started off with an empty table, and I'm thinking about who should be involved in a conversation about the system of walking in Cork. And as I mentioned for the last slide, the usual suspects will have to be there in terms of the local sports partnerships, the local authorities, researchers, those of you who you would think have a direct role to play in the promotion of physical activity or the promotion of walking or in the walking system in my case. But to really get a holistic perspective, we started to identify those who might have an indirect role to play, such as tourism, those who work in healthcare, disability organisations, and those individuals came together over the course of 2 online workshops and 5 semi-structured interviews to develop this iteration of the systems map that you can see on the slide here. And as I mentioned, it wasn't, the purposes of my research wasn't to develop the map. It was actually to identify some solutions to problems that existed within that particular system. And over the course of the 2 workshops and over the course of the 5 interviews, there were 19 different solutions that were identified by the stakeholders themselves that existed within that particular system. And there were 2 kind of arms to those solutions and 2 priority areas or leverage points, we've called them. One of them was how organisations communicate between each other and also within organisations as well. So communication was one leverage point, and a second leverage point was data and evidence, and how data and evidence is collected but also used in the system of walking in Cork. And I might just flag one thing on that issue of data and evidence. I suspect that if something like this was to be developed for walking in Waterford, or cycling for that matter, data and evidence could potentially be an issue that could pop up. And something that I'm working on at the moment that I'd be happy to speak with anyone who's interested afterwards is I'm working on a piece of work now that's collating any existing evidence in relation to monitoring walking or mobility from multiple different sources that could be of benefit to local authorities in terms of monitoring the movement of through urban areas, etc. So we're using data sources like footfall counters, public Wi-Fi networks, and kind of more big data stuff then, like you know, phone network data and stuff like that. So there is an abundance of data out there, and I just wanted to flag that as well, if anyone here was interested in maybe discussing that further after that. So I suppose, what learnings can I offer from my own work, and then ultimately what any systems map that have been developed so far for Waterford? The pieces on the right hand side of that diagram are kind of the big ones for me. The ability for a systems map, and ultimately the systems mapping process, to allow stakeholders to gain a new perspective on the problem that they're working on, and ultimately where they fit within this big complex system, this big messy bowl of spaghetti, to be able to say whose work overlaps with theirs, what resources can they contribute to the system, how can they help, and ultimately the ability for a systems mapping workshop and a process that I went through to be able to identify context-specific solutions for Waterford is something that I feel is a real benefit here. And then logistically, these workshops would be traditionally kind of done in person, and they might go over the course of a day or maybe 2 half days, but I had to amend my approach because of COVID, and we held the workshops online, and I feel like with enough support from facilitators and enough effort gone into structuring the workshop and really tailoring the questions that you're asking of the stakeholders, online workshops can do the job in terms of acting as a catalyst to bring these interdisciplinary stakeholders together who might not necessarily work with each other. And a big one as well is you don't have to start from scratch with these. You can take a systems map that's been developed before and just apply it to the Waterford context. And that's exactly what I did in County Cork. I picked up a map that was developed for physical activity in Australia and applied it to the Cork context. So you don't have to start from scratch when you are developing these types of systems maps. So really, just to conclude, if the systems mapping exercise and looking at the problem of sustainable transport as a system was something that was going to be taken on board in Waterford, acknowledging the complexity of the problem is the first step, but also embracing the complexity of it as well. And the first step in embracing the complexity would be to engage with these stakeholders who kind of are those indirect roles in the system, and thinking outside the box in terms of who should be sitting around that table. But to tie it back to the purposes of today's event, if we're really trying to focus on the young people and their problems in engaging with cycling or walking within the system in Waterford, you know, yes, the usual suspects should be there in terms of the local sports partnerships, the local authorities, but if we really want to get the young people's perspectives, they have to be at the top of the table and they need to be involved in the process. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Dylan. I think that was a really interesting presentation and I suppose a new way of looking at things. And just following on from that, I have just one quick question for you, if you don't mind. You'd mentioned in your presentation the working group that you'd put together in Cork, and this included things, organisations like your local authorities, your local sports partnerships, researchers, planners, teachers, etc. And you'd also mentioned applying learnings in Waterford. So with that in mind, would you recommend or suggest that a similar group like this working group be put together in Waterford to map the walking environment, and could this also be applied to the cycling network?
Yeah, I think to answer the question, yes, there would be a lot of overlap between the organisations that would attend a systems mapping workshop discussing walking in Cork to Waterford, and I can't stress this enough, that specific focus needs to be placed on understanding the context. So for example, there were organisations that attended in County Cork that wouldn't be attending in Waterford. So like the Transmobility Forum in Cork is an example of that. They're an interdisciplinary forum around sustainable transport, around active travel in Cork. But as far as I know, at the time of the research anyway, they didn't exist anywhere else. So that's just one contextual factor that is key here, you know. So the list that I had is a good place to start in terms of recruiting participants, but specific focus does need to be placed on the context. Yeah.
Okay, so look at the area in question, I suppose.
Yeah.
The relevant, you mentioned the stakeholders. Okay, well, thank you very much, Dylan. That was really interesting. I suppose, sorry, but we're going to move on to our panel discussion, our second and final panel discussion. So again, I'm going to invite all of the members of the panel discussion to turn on their cameras. And again, just to avoid feedback, keep your mics muted until the question is directed to yourselves. That's great, thank you. And again, just to remind, to get through as many questions as we can, if you could keep your answers kind of short to around the 2-minute mark, if possible. Okay, so welcome back to all our panel members. So my first question is to Dominic. So Dominic, as a regional assembly, could you support a community-wide forum of all stakeholders involved in a sustainable transport with a view to mapping our requirements and gaining consensus on plans to encourage more active and sustainable transport in Waterford?
Yeah, for sure. The Regional Assembly would be, very supportive of that kind of initiative. In a compact city like Waterford, the provision of new or additional bus services and the provision of better walking and cycling facilities can make a real difference to the way people move around the city and to their quality of life. So that's something the Regional Assembly would very much support and get behind any initiatives. And, going about mapping out and consulting with people, mapping out what those requirements are. I know it's part of the current Metropolitan Area Transport Strategy, but that should be a continuous process. So, and there'll be kind of further objectives along the way. So, yeah, for sure, the Regional Assembly would be very supportive of that kind of approach.
Great, okay, thanks Dominic. The next question we got in was for Rachel. So Rachel, are there any plans to create a dual carriageway or a motorway between Waterford and Cork and between Waterford and Limerick to improve connectivity time for students commuting to third level institutions in these cities by bus?
Thank you, Karen. I guess the first thing I should say really from a transport infrastructure, our remit is national roads, which are, and motorways. That's the first thing to say. In terms of Waterford to Cork, we already have the N25 and the bypass around Waterford, so I don't think there are any plans in the National Development Framework for that section. However, in terms of Waterford to Limerick, there are 2 projects currently in the National Development Framework, but they're a long way off. And this is, I suppose, the thing with transport and transport infrastructure. It takes time. The 2 projects really are. The first one is Waterford to Care, and the second one then will be from Care to Limerick Junction. But to be honest, they are about 5 years, if not longer, and they're at the very, very early stages. So I don't really want to say yes or no, but they are there, but it's just the time that it takes for these projects to come to fruition.
Well, at least it's good to hear they're in the plans anyway, in the makings.
Yeah, yeah.
First step. And Jane, my next question is to you, and this has come in from a student in 6th class in Glór-na-Mara, who seem to be very active in this area. So the question is, I personally think that if there were more cycling paths and smoother footpaths, way more people would walk or scoot to school. And I think that they should put more cycle and footpaths in, not just in the town of Tramore, but also for places that are just a few kilometres outside the town, for people that would be a good bit further away from school than others. So would you agree with this suggestion? And if so, how could the Green Schools support this initiative?
First of all, great question. I'm 100% supportive of it. Green Schools have been working with schools around the country to try and improve infrastructure around schools for over a decade now. So if the pupils of Glór-na-Mara are interested, what we do is we do walking and cycling audits, or walkability and cyclability audits, and that's a way of the children getting involved in looking at how the pedestrian infrastructure is like around their schools. So they might walk a certain way and there might be blockages, or there might be really narrow footpaths, or there might be no pedestrian crossings, so they can feed into the audit, and then we give it over to the local authority, to Waterford, and hopefully Waterford can then act upon that. So I know that we were, Katrina was mentioning the school zones. Green Schools actually developed the template for the school zones, which are the pencil bollards and the lovely colourful dots, in partnership with the National Transport Authority. So Dublin City Council were the first to roll them out, and we're hoping that other local authorities will roll them out. So maybe Waterford could look at the front of school gate and see about looking at school zones as a priority. So the kids in Glornamara could look at their front of school, they could identify what the problem is and then feed into that process. And just to say that Green Schools will also be rolling out a national programme over the coming months, which is hopefully will be launched next month in partnership with the Department of Transport and the National Transport Authority, and it's Safe Routes to School. So looking at things like networks for walking and cycling, auditing these, how we can improve them, looking at the front of school gate for school zones, and also looking at cycle parking infrastructure. So we would ask all school children to get involved. We're delighted to hear from them so that we can make sure that the infrastructure is actually for them and we don't leave anybody behind.
Great, thank you. That's great to hear, Jane. We'd encourage everybody to get involved in those public consultations. Okay, so my next question then is to be directed to Shirley. So Shirley, how do you envisage the future of rural school travel, and what plans are in place to increase rural bus services and investment in rural transport for students?
Okay, thank you, Karen, and just first of all say thank you. I'm delighted to be here today, and it's great to see all the work that is being done in our schools. And just to say, while our school transport scheme is obviously a scheme that, you know, we use vehicles to bring children to school, we're very supportive of initiatives that support walking or cycling. And, you know, Jane mentioned there the Safe Routes to School programme, which we've been talking to the Department of Transport about, and our engagement in that. I suppose in regard to your question about the future of rural transport and do we see, or are there plans to increase rural bus services, I suppose just by way of background, our scheme, it's quite a significant scheme. It's operated by Bus Éireann on behalf of the department, and the scheme was established in 1967. So while it has evolved somewhat, the purpose of the scheme has remained the same, in that it's to provide a transport service for children who reside remote from their nearest school. And under the terms of the scheme, children are eligible where they live at primary level 3.2 kilometres and at post-primary level 4.8 kilometres from and are attending their nearest school. So in effect it is a rural transport scheme, because in urban areas people tend not to live that distance from their nearest school, and you know, so in effect it is a rural scheme. In the current year we have 114,000 children travelling on our school transport services, which, you know, it does in effect reduce car journeys to schools by, you know, that number of children travelling. The scheme is demand-led, I suppose, in regard to your question on increasing numbers of services. The scheme is demand-led, and every year every child who is eligible for transport and who applies and completes the application process on time is guaranteed a seat, and the department and Bus Éireann will provide a seat for every child. So if numbers of eligible children increase, services will increase accordingly. In saying all of that, we have just commenced a review of our school transport scheme, and I suppose as part of that review we will be looking at issues such as how our scheme, you know, meets the objectives in terms of rural development, climate change, you know, delivering a better value for our students, and, you know, providing a service that is sustainable in terms of reducing car journeys and supporting rural development. Yeah, I hope that answers your question there, Karen.
That's great, yeah, thank you very much, Shirley. Okay, so Fergus, my next question is for you. So again, we have somebody from Glornamara School in Tramore, and they say, I go to Glornamara School in Tramore and we want to create a school street around our school to improve safety and encourage more sustainable transport. We have submitted a recommendation to Waterford City and County Council, and can you advise when we will hear about our recommendations for a school street?
Yeah, I suppose the short answer is yes, we'd be very happy to engage with the school and on that proposal, and as soon as COVID restrictions allow, we'll get back into that space in terms of consultation, and we're working ahead with that. But I suppose on that, just I suppose give it to flesh it out a little bit more, one of the key points in looking at school streets and safe zones around schools, it's really a multi partnership approach that is required in those. We would have done a very significant amount of work. I don't know if there's anybody here from Portlaw National School, but we put in a school street zone there last year, which has been very successful. But it requires, and I would say there should be putting butt on it. Like for the success of it, though, is very much dependent on a real engagement by the school authorities, by the school principal, by the teachers, by the parents, and by the school children themselves, along with the council. Because, like, just to give an example, like in Portlaw, where we actually closed off the street in front of the school, and we put other engineering solutions in place in relation to additional footpaths and parking zones, safe parking zone away from the school. The school came on board, and they voluntarily provide the resource to lift and to remove and put the bollards in place. That closes the street for the duration. And as I said, it's very much has to be like it's very much a partnership approach. But we're really keen and very interested in getting involved in those type of partnerships with schools across the county. The other thing I'd say, I suppose, in relation to Tramore is that we have, I suppose, some very exciting plans in hand for Tramore with respect to developing a really good cycle and pedestrian infrastructure in Tramore. We've been given we've been allocated quite a lot of money this year by the National Transport Authority as part of the government's overall active travel plan for the next 5 years. And I suppose one of the first things we'll be doing towards putting together an active travel strategy for Tramore, looking at all of the issues that we've been talking here at the moment in relation to how do we get people safely walking and cycling in particular from their homes to their schools, to the amenities, to the community centres, to the retail outlets and so on and so forth. And we'll be hoping to start that process this year. And we're also starting the process as well, this will gladden Mark O'Callaghan's heart of designing a segregated cycle lane for the ring road in Tramore as well, which will start that process. But I suppose it's looking at that as being the spine, if you like, of the cycle network in Tramore, and then all the branches from that will link back into the triple tractors, the likes of the schools, the communities, the community facilities and so forth. So I suppose I've gone around the word a little bit there, but I'd like to go back to the first, I suppose the core of the question is, yes, is a short answer, and we'd be very happy to engage, and we'll start that process as soon as we can.
Great, that's great. Thank you very much, Fergus. Some great work going on for the sounds of it. Next question then is for you, Mark. So do you think we should have recognisable school safe zones with coloured pavements and roads and pencil bollards implemented around all schools in Waterford City as part of the Waterford Metropolitan Area Transport Strategy?
Yeah, the short answer, I'll give a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is yes. The long answer, before I embark on the long answer, there has been huge engagement, as you can hear from Glornamara National School. I don't know if she's on the call in the audience, but she would never put herself forward for praise, but we have an outstanding Green Schools coordinator within that school, Noreen Phelan, as well as an extremely engaged student populace there, who all deserve, they all deserve praise, but definitely it is Miss Phelan who draws all of that together, and she rightly deserves praise. Yeah, I think street legibility is extremely important. So how the motorist perceives the street as they come into it, and a lot of that is to do with the width of your carriageway, the road furniture, all of the indications that, you know, everything about a motorway says drive fast, it's wide, there are no encumbrance, all of those things. If you looked at Waterford city centre, and even when traffic is permitted there in the mornings, the fact that everything bleeds together, it's quite bollarded, even the road surface, all of these things tell people in motorised transport, slow down. And certainly outside of our schools, we need to be given those visual cues to drivers. This is an area where there are children, slow down. So you do that through your road furniture, you do through kind of clear signalling and signage. Those things are very important. I actually haven't seen the pencil bollards before, but those are very interesting because, of course, once you see something unusual and you pay attention, it's like almost that rubbernecking approach. You slow down to see, well, because you haven't seen those bollards before, you'll slow down to look at them. So absolutely, and I'm very strong on the idea of mapping a town from a child's point of view and building those independent mobility networks. Yeah, Fergus referenced several of the projects that are ongoing in Tramore. Tramore is perfectly set to be a nationwide example. We're a small enough town. We actually have a ring road, which, as Fergus said, if we develop that properly for segregated cycle lanes, we'll have formed the spine. And then one of the earlier contributors, I think it was Robert, was saying you don't necessarily need segregated transport when you get into those quiet cul-de-sacs. You know, the Dutch example is the autosugest example, that cars are a guest within those neighbourhoods, and you can very easily, again, through visual signage, through those visual cues, the road legibility. People don't drive quickly in housing estates anyway. They are watching for children, and you can build on that and you can develop that out. If we get that, develop that spine in Tramore and link our housing estates and our schools and our sports facilities in, we'll be a long way towards developing culture. But as I said, this is into the long answer. Yes, absolutely. Outside of schools, we should be creating those visual cues so that drivers know there are vulnerable road users here. Slow the hell down.
Yeah, I think that's some very good points, Mark. Thanks. And then, Robert, I have a question for you. So I go to the Ursula line and there are always cars parked where they shouldn't be, and this causes a lot of traffic outside our school. I'm sure this is an issue around a lot of schools. So bollards have now been installed everywhere, which is just causing more confusion. Can the part of the road between Pierce Park and the inner ring road be made one way to create a safe zone outside of our school?
I suppose there's a lot of overlap between this question and it was Jane and Mark, and I think Fergus's answer earlier on. Making it one way is one option. There's various other options that should be considered. You can have traffic restrictions that would be time plated. You could make the road a cul-de-sac but still allow walking and cycling to come through. That's called filtered permeability. You could do park and stride. A lot of this comes back to the network planning. And then there's the school streets that were discussed earlier on. So it's probably not a measure that would be specifically included in the transport strategy, which is too high level. But the NTA definitely engages with the council on these matters, and it's certainly something that we would be considering.
Okay, great. Okay, so that's great, thank you. And I think we have time for one more question. So Shirley, I'm going to direct the final question that I have to you, if you don't mind. Do you think aspects of COVID school travel adaptations will persist, for example, the staggered drop-offs, to support more sustainable school travel practices following a reduction in the coronavirus restrictions? So this was our post-COVID.
Okay, thank you, Karen.
Please.
I suppose just first of all, it's probably important to point out that our school transport scheme, while we have additional hygiene and cleaning measures and PPE equipment for staff at the moment, as you know, in terms of dealing with COVID and preventing the spread of the virus, our school transport scheme timetables have not changed in general. And the reason for that, Karen, is that our school buses are often part of what we call a double run. So they may drop to post-primary school followed by a primary. So what we actually did this year is we asked schools to take into account the normal timetabling of school transport services in considering their staggered dropping off and pick up times, because in general it's not possible to change those times because they're tied into plans for other routes and other schools. As I mentioned previously, we've just commenced a review of the scheme. We're certainly very interested in examining and making recommendations as part of that review on sustainable travel practices, and that will come out of that. But I suppose in answer to your question, it wasn't really possible. It wasn't one of the measures we did, you know, really do as part of COVID. You know, there were many others, but that wasn't generally possible on our school transport scheme.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I see Rose there who may have some questions for our panelists.
I have another question that I think was there for the original panel discussion that we didn't have time for, and it's for you, Fergus. It's a question. I attend Knockman National School and we have a really good park and stride initiative from the beach car park. However, there's no footpath or street lights between the Geo Park Visitor Centre and the school. Are there any plans to put one in? So to put in a footpath and street lights there.
Yeah, I've been quite familiar with the area, Rose, and we would have done some work there a couple of years ago when we would have, I suppose, done if you like, completed the phase one, which was from the beach car park up as far as the Geo Park Interpretive Centre. Yes, we have plans to extend it from there over as far as the National School. When exactly we'll do it, I'm not too sure. It's part of our overall application to the National Transport Authority for active travel measures. So I'd be hopeful that sometime in the next year or two that we will get to achieve
Sorry. Thank you very much, panel, for answering all our questions. You can turn your cameras off now for another few moments, and we'll move on with our webinar. So I'd like to ask a question of the audience. You've been watching here this morning, and we've had Fionn the Foot available during videos and presentations today. So we'd like to ask the audience, have you seen him 7 times, 8 times, 9 times, or 10 times during this event today? If you can click on whichever answer you think is the correct answer, and we'll let you know how you got on. So if I give you just a moment there to answer the question, and we'll now close the poll. Okay, so we have varied answers. Well, I can tell you that 44% of you that answered 9 times are correct. So that was the answer. So unfortunately, a few people missed out on the results. They must have missed Fionn the Foot on 1 or 2 occasions during the event. So thank you very much for that. We'll close that poll. Okay, so I'd like to ask all of our presenters, panelists and organisers to turn on their cameras now. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for giving up your time today to participate in the Youth Voice, one of the few platforms that are available for young people to put their voice to policymakers and decision makers in the Southern region. I'd like to give a special thank you to Dr. Barry Lamb of Waterford Institute of Technology and Edwina Coleman from Antashka Green Schools, who have been working with me to arrange this event over the last number of months. So thank you very much for that. In addition, I'd like to thank our organisers today, some of whom you saw or some you might have heard from, to Karen, Catherine, Alice, Anna and Maria. Thank you very much. Without your work in the background, this wouldn't be possible. And finally, I'd like to say a very big thank you to all the boys and girls who submitted audio and video clips or questions to our panels. We really appreciate you joining us today and giving us your perspective on sustainable travel in Waterford. I'd like to thank you all again for taking the time to join us this morning and really appreciate the hard work that you are doing for sustainable transport in your schools and your contribution today. So I hope everybody enjoyed the event today. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate your time and your efforts, and I think it has raised quite a number of questions and quite a number of viewpoints, and we thank you all for your contribution. Take care, everyone. We'll close our webinar now. Thank you.